On the far edge of the village of Aramu, where the forest shadows stretched long and the wind whispered through tall grasses, there stood a hut that no one dared to enter. It was not the oldest building in the village. It was not the largest. But it was the one place every child had been warned about since they first learned to walk. The abandoned hut. Even during the busiest market days, when laughter and music filled the air, the villagers avoided looking in its direction. Hunters returning from the forest would walk the long way around it. Farmers refused to let their cattle graze anywhere near its crumbling walls. And when night came, no one, absolutely no one, walked near that hut, because the elders all told the same story. They said the hut once belonged to a powerful herbalist who protected the village from unseen dangers. A man who knew secrets hidden in the forest. Secrets that ordinary people were never meant to understand. But when the herbalist died many years ago, something strange happened. The hut was sealed, and the elders warned that whatever had been locked inside it must never be disturbed. For generations, the villagers obeyed that warning. Until one curious boy began asking questions no one wanted to answer. His name was Tunde, and on the night he decided to enter the abandoned hut, the quiet village of Aramu would discover why some secrets are never meant to be uncovered. But before we continue, if you enjoy mysterious and powerful African folktales like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. A lot of care and effort goes into bringing these stories to life for you. Now let us return to the story. The village of Aramu rested between two gentle hills and a wide stretch of fertile farmland that had fed its people for generations. At sunrise, the village came alive with the sounds of roosters crowing, wooden pestles pounding yam in mortars, and children laughing as they chased each other along the dusty paths between mud houses. From above, Aramu looked peaceful. Rows of small round huts with thatched roofs formed a loose circle around the village square, where a giant iroko tree stood proudly at the center. Beneath its wide branches, elders gathered each evening to tell stories, settle disputes, and share wisdom that had been passed down through generations. Life in Aramu followed the rhythm of nature. When the rains came, farmers worked long hours planting maize, cassava, and vegetables in the dark, rich soil. When the sun shone bright, women carried baskets of produce to the market while children fetched water from the nearby stream. Festivals were the happiest times in the village. During the harvest celebrations, drums echoed through the night while dancers dressed in colorful fabrics spun around large fires. Elders smiled proudly as the younger generation performed the same dances their ancestors had once danced. To an outsider, Aramu was a place of joy, unity, and tradition. But every village has its secrets, and Aramu's secret stood silently at the edge of the forest. The abandoned hut. It sat where the farmland ended and the thick forest began, as though it marked a boundary between the world of people and the world of spirits. The hut itself looked ordinary at first glance. Its mud walls had cracked from many seasons of rain and heat. Dry palm leaves covered the roof, though many had fallen away over the years, leaving gaps where moonlight could slip through. Yet something about the place felt wrong. No grass grew around the hut. Animals avoided it completely. Even the wind seemed quieter there. Older villagers claimed that long ago, the hut belonged to a mysterious herbalist named Baba Oladipo. According to the elders, he was not an ordinary healer. He possessed knowledge that few people could understand, knowledge of ancient herbs, hidden forces in the forest, and powerful spiritual protections. Whenever illness spread through the village, Baba Oladipo knew exactly which roots and leaves could cure it. Whenever hunters disappeared in the forest, he performed rituals that guided them safely home. Some villagers believed he could even speak with spirits. But with great power often comes great fear. And as the years passed, people began whispering that Baba Oladipo knew too much. Then one night something happened. No one knew exactly what it was. But the following morning the herbalist was gone. Not dead, not buried, gone. His hut remained standing, but the elders ordered that it must never be entered again. They sealed the door and warned the villagers that disturbing the hut could bring misfortune upon the entire village. At first, people asked questions. But in time, questions turned into stories. And stories turned into warnings. Parents frightened their children with tales of spirits guarding the hut. Hunters claimed that strange lights flickered inside the broken walls at night. Some swore they heard whispers when the wind blew through the trees nearby. Over the years, the hut became something more than just an abandoned building. It became a symbol of fear. Even the bravest men in the village avoided walking near it after sunset. As generations passed, the story of the hut slowly faded into the background of everyday life. Most villagers stopped wondering what secrets might be hidden inside. Most people were content not knowing. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and sometimes it grows strongest in the hearts of the young. Before we continue the story, let me ask you something. If there was a mysterious place in your village that everyone warned you to avoid, would you stay away from it? Or would your curiosity push you to discover the truth? Tell me what you think in the comments, because the boy at the center of this story made a choice that would change everything. Among the children of Aramu village, there was one boy who never seemed satisfied with the answers adults gave. His name was Tunde. Tunde was 14 years old, tall for his age, with curious eyes that always seemed to be searching for something beyond what others could see. While other boys spent most of their time racing through the fields or playing games in the dusty village square, Tunde often wandered alone along the hills behind his family's farm. He liked quiet places, places where he could think, places where he could look out across the land and imagine the stories hidden within it. Tunde lived with his mother and younger sister in a small mud house near the eastern edge of the village. His father had once been a respected farmer, known for growing the largest yams in Aramu. But many years earlier, a sudden illness had taken his life, leaving Tunde as the only man in the family. Since then, Tunde had tried his best to help his mother. Each morning before sunrise, he carried a hoe to their small farm and worked the soil while the air was still cool. He gathered firewood from the forest and fetched water from the stream with his sister. Despite his responsibilities, Tunde's mind was never far from questions. Questions about the world. Questions about the stories the elders told. And most of all, questions about the abandoned hut. From the hill behind his farm, the hut was clearly visible. It stood near the dark line of trees where the forest began, its crooked roof rising like a lonely shadow against the horizon. Many times, Tunde had stopped his work just to stare at it. Sometimes he imagined what the hut might have looked like when Baba Oladipo lived there. Perhaps the walls had once been freshly coated with smooth clay. Perhaps herbs had hung from the roof beams, filling the air with powerful scents. Other times, he wondered about the night the herbalist disappeared. What had truly happened inside that hut? The elders never explained. Whenever children asked questions, the adults would simply shake their heads and say the same words. Some secrets are better left alone. But those words never satisfied Tunde. If the hut was truly dangerous, he wondered, why had no one destroyed it? Why had the elders allowed it to remain standing for so many years? The mystery felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. And the more he thought about it, the more restless he became. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the villagers gathered beneath the great Irako tree in the village square. The warm glow of firelight danced across their faces, while the elders shared stories from long ago. Children sat in a wide circle around the fire, their eyes wide with curiosity. That night, the oldest elder in the village, Baba Oladipo, began telling a story about the forest spirits that protected Aramu in ancient times. His voice was deep and slow, the kind that made every word feel heavy with meaning. The forest has always watched over this village, he said, staring into the flames. But long ago, there were forces within it that even our ancestors feared. The children leaned closer. Tunde listened carefully. Then Baba Oladipo mentioned something that made the entire crowd grow quiet. The abandoned hut at the edge of the forest was once part of that ancient protection, he said. But some doors, once closed, must never be opened again. A ripple of unease passed through the villagers. Even the adults shifted uncomfortably. Tunde felt his heart beating faster. This was the closest anyone had ever come to explaining the truth. But just as quickly as the elder had begun speaking about the hut, he stopped. The fire crackled loudly. No one asked him to continue. and soon the conversation turned to other things. But the words had already taken root in Tunde's mind. Some doors must never be opened again. As the villagers slowly returned to their homes that night, Tunde walked quietly along the path toward his family's farm. The moon had risen high in the sky, and in the distance, the abandoned hut stood silently in the darkness. For the first time in his life, Tunde felt certain of something. The truth about that hut had been hidden for too long, and if no one else in the village was brave enough to uncover it, he would. Before we continue, think about this for a moment. If you were in Tunde's place, would you dare to explore the hut that everyone feared? Or would you trust the warnings of the elders? Tell me in the comments, because what Tunde decided to do next would awaken a secret that had been sleeping for generations. The next day began like any other in the village of Aramu. The sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and orange. Roosters crowed across the village, and the familiar sounds of morning life filled the air. Women sweeping the front of their huts, farmers sharpening their tools, and children laughing as they prepared for the day. But for Tunde, this morning felt different. The thought that had taken root in his mind the night before had not faded. In fact, it had grown stronger. While he worked on the farm beside his mother, clearing weeds from the cassava plants, his eyes kept drifting toward the far edge of the fields where the forest began. And there it was, the abandoned hut. Even in the bright daylight, it seemed strangely quiet, almost as if the land itself were avoiding it. Tunde wiped sweat from his forehead and stared at it for a long moment. Today, he told himself, today he would finally discover what secrets were hidden inside. But he knew he could not go there while the village was awake. Someone would see him, so he waited. He worked quietly beside his mother, helped his sister carry water from the stream, and pretended that everything was normal. But inside, his mind was counting the hours. When evening came, the sky slowly darkened and a cool breeze drifted through the village. Families gathered for supper, and the smell of roasted maize and boiling soup filled the air. Soon the familiar rhythm of night settled over Aramu. Drums sounded faintly in the distance from another village celebrating a festival. The elders gathered beneath the irako tree, speaking softly about harvest plans. And one by one, the lanterns in the village began to fade. This was the moment Tunde had been waiting for. Quietly, he slipped out of his family's hut. The moon hung high in the sky, casting pale silver light across the fields. The night insects hummed in the grass as he followed the narrow footpath that led toward the forest. With every step he took, the village behind him grew quieter. Soon, only the sound of the wind in the tall grass remained. Tunde's heart began to beat faster. The hut was getting closer. For years he had only seen it from a distance, but now he could see every detail clearly. The mud walls were more cracked than he had imagined. Parts of the roof had collapsed inward, leaving jagged gaps that looked like broken teeth against the sky. And the silence around the hut was unsettling. No insects buzzed nearby. No birds moved in the trees above it. Even the wind seemed to weaken as Tunde approached. He stopped a few steps away from the doorway. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. The elders had warned everyone never to enter this place. What if the stories were true? What if something terrible really was hidden inside? Tunde swallowed nervously and looked back toward the village. The lanterns of Aramu flickered faintly in the distance. Everything seemed peaceful. Nothing looked dangerous. Slowly, he turned back toward the hut. "It's just an old building," he whispered to himself. With trembling hands, he stepped forward and pushed against the wooden door. To his surprise, it opened easily. The hinges creaked loudly in the silence of the night. Tunde froze, listening carefully. But nothing moved. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The air inside the hut was heavy with dust and the faint scent of dried herbs. Moonlight slipped through the broken roof, casting pale beams across the floor. At first glance, the hut looked almost empty. But as Tunde's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he began to notice strange things. Bundles of dried plants still hung from wooden beams near the ceiling. Small clay jars lined the walls, their surfaces marked with faded symbols. In one corner stood an old wooden table, its surface covered in carvings that looked like protective markings. Tunde moved slowly through the room, his curiosity growing stronger than his fear. Everything around him felt like a piece of a forgotten story. Then something unusual caught his attention. Near the center of the floor, the dirt looked disturbed. It was slightly raised, as though something had once been buried there. Tunde knelt down and brushed away some of the loose soil with his hands. Beneath it, he felt something hard. His heart began pounding. Carefully, he dug deeper. Within moments, his fingers touched the edge of a small wooden box hidden beneath the floor. The box was old, but surprisingly well preserved. Strange symbols had been carved into its surface, and a thin rope tied tightly around it kept the lid sealed. Tunde stared at it, his breath growing shallow. Why would someone hide something like this beneath the hut? Slowly, he lifted the box from the ground. Felt heavier than he expected. Whatever was inside, it had been hidden for a reason. For several long seconds, Tunde simply held the box in his hands. He knew he should probably leave it alone, but curiosity whispered louder than caution. With trembling fingers, he began to untie the rope. Before we continue, think carefully about this moment. If you were the one standing inside that mysterious hut, holding a hidden box that had been buried for generations, would you open it, or would you leave it exactly where you found it? Tell me what you would do in the comments. Because when Tunde finally opened that box, he discovered a secret that would change the entire village of Aramu forever. The inside of the hut felt colder than the air outside. Tunde stepped forward slowly, the wooden floor creaking beneath his feet. The dim light from the lantern revealed thick layers of dust covering almost everything in the room. It was clear that no one had entered the hut for many, many years. Yet something about the place felt alive. The air carried a strange scent, a mixture of dried herbs, old wood, and something else he could not recognize. Tunde's eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. The hut was smaller than he expected, but it was filled with unusual objects. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding clay bowls, bundles of dried plants, and old gourds tied with thin pieces of rope. Some of the herbs had turned gray with age. Others still held faint traces of color. At the far end of the hut stood a small wooden table covered with symbols carved deep into its surface. Tunde leaned closer and traced one of the shapes with his finger. He had never seen markings like them before. They looked ancient, powerful, almost sacred. Suddenly, a faint breeze slipped through a crack in the wall, making the lantern flame flicker. The shadows in the room seemed to move. Tunde turned quickly, his heart pounding. For a moment, he felt as if someone was standing behind him. But the hut was empty. He swallowed nervously and turned back toward the table. That was when he noticed something unusual. Part of the floor beneath the table looked different from the rest. The wooden boards there were slightly darker, and one of them appeared loose. Curiosity pushed aside his fear. Tunde knelt down and carefully pressed his fingers against the edge of the board. It shifted. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he lifted it. Beneath the board was a hidden compartment. Inside it lay a small wooden box wrapped tightly in faded red cloth. For a moment, Tunde simply stared at it. Something deep inside him whispered that he should stop, that he should close the floor and leave the hut immediately. But another voice, stronger and louder, told him that he had already come too far to turn back. With trembling hands, he reached into the compartment and lifted the box. It was surprisingly heavy. He placed it gently on the table and began unwrapping the cloth. The fabric crumbled slightly as he touched it, as though it had been waiting decades for someone to open it again. Finally, the cloth fell away. Inside the box was a book. Not an ordinary book. This one looked extremely old. Its cover was made of dark leather, cracked and worn from age. Strange symbols had been carved into its surface, forming patterns that made Tunde feel strangely uneasy. Even without opening it, he could sense that the book carried something powerful, something important. On the center of the cover was a single symbol shaped like a circle surrounded by tiny lines that stretched outward like rays of sunlight. Tunde slowly opened the first page. Inside were drawings of herbs, roots, and plants, carefully labeled with notes written in a language he could barely understand. But as he turned the pages, the drawings began to change. The later pages were filled with symbols, rituals, and strange instructions. Some described how to protect a home from evil spirits. Others spoke about powerful forces that lived within the forest. The deeper he read, the more intense the writings became. His heart began beating faster. Then he reached a page that made his blood run cold. At the top of the page were large words written in bold ink. The Binding Ritual. Below the title was a detailed explanation of something Baba Oladipo had done long ago. According to the writing, there had once been a powerful spirit living deep within the forest. A restless force that caused sickness, madness, and misfortune. The spirit could not be destroyed. But Baba Oladipo had discovered a way to trap it. Using ancient herbs, sacred symbols, and powerful incantations, he had performed a ritual inside this very hut. The ritual bound the spirit to an object. And that object was hidden beneath the hut, sealed away so that no one would ever release it again. Tunde's hands began to tremble. He quickly turned the page. What he saw next made his heart stop. A drawing of the exact wooden box sitting in front of him. And beneath it were words that chilled him to the bone. Within this container lies the seal that binds the wandering spirit. As long as it remains closed, the spirit will remain asleep. Tunde slowly looked back at the box. The lid. It wasn't sealed. In fact, it looked like it had already been opened. A cold wave of fear rushed through him. Then suddenly, the lantern flame flickered violently. The wind outside began to howl. And somewhere deep within the forest, something awakened. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If you discovered a secret like this, one that could unleash something dangerous, would you try to fix it? Or would you run away and pretend you never found it? Tell me what you would do in the comments, because Tunde was about to learn that some secrets were buried for a reason. For several long seconds, Tunde stood frozen beside the table. His eyes remained fixed on the wooden box. The words from the book echoed loudly inside his mind. As long as it remains closed, the spirit will remain asleep. But the lid was already open. His chest tightened. A strange uneasiness crept through the room, as though the air itself had grown heavier. Outside, the wind suddenly rose, pushing through the cracks in the hut's walls. The lantern flame shook violently, throwing wild shadows across the room. Tunde's heart pounded faster. I should leave, he whispered to himself. But the moment he took a step toward the door, something strange happened. The lantern went out. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. Tunde gasped. For a moment he could see nothing at all. Then slowly, faint shapes began to form within the darkness. The air felt colder, far colder than before. And then he heard it. A sound, soft at first, like a faint whisper brushing against his ears. He turned quickly. Hello? He called nervously. The whisper came again, but this time it sounded closer. Too close. It was not the wind. It was a voice. Tunde's breath caught in his throat. The whisper was too quiet for him to understand the words, yet it carried a strange rhythm, like someone trying to speak through layers of distance. His legs felt weak. He stumbled backward until his shoulder hit the wall. The whisper stopped. For a brief moment, silence filled the hut again. Then suddenly, knock! The sound came from beneath the floor. Tunde froze. His eyes widened with terror. Another knock followed. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock. It was coming from the hidden compartment, from the place where the box had been buried. Tunde's mind raced wildly. That was impossible. Nothing should have been under there. Nothing alive. But the knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. The wooden floor trembled slightly with each sound. Then the whisper returned. This time it was clearer, and it spoke a single word. Tunde. His blood turned cold. He hadn't told anyone he was coming here. No one knew he had entered the hut. Yet the voice had spoken his name. A powerful wave of panic surged through him. Without thinking, he grabbed the box and the book from the table and rushed toward the door. He threw it open and ran. Branches scratched against his arms as he raced through the tall grass toward the path leading back to the village. Behind him, The wind roared loudly through the forest. For a terrifying moment, he thought he heard footsteps chasing him. But when he glanced back, the hut stood alone in the darkness. Silent, watching. Tunde didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the village. By then, the moon was high in the sky. Most of the villagers were asleep. Only a few lanterns glowed faintly through the windows of nearby homes. He slowed his pace, struggling to catch his breath. His heart was still racing violently. Maybe it was just my imagination, he whispered to himself. But deep inside, he knew that wasn't true. He could still hear the whisper in his mind. Tunde, clutching the box tightly against his chest, he hurried into his family's house. His mother and sister were already asleep. The small room was quiet except for the soft sound of their breathing. Tunde gently placed the box and the book beneath his bed, hoping the darkness there would somehow hide them from whatever force had awakened in the hut. Then he lay down on his mat. But sleep refused to come. Every small sound made him jump. The creaking of the wooden walls, the rustling of leaves outside. Even the distant hoot of an owl made his heart pound. Hours passed. Finally, exhaustion pulled his eyes closed. But his rest did not last long. Because sometime later that night, Tunde woke suddenly. He did not know what had awakened him. The room was silent. The moonlight shining through the window cast pale shadows across the floor. He sat up slowly. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Then he heard it. A soft scratching sound. At first he thought it might be a rat. But the sound grew louder. Slow. Deliberate. Scratching, scraping, scratching. It was coming from beneath his bed. Tunde's breathing became shallow. His hands trembled. The box. The scratching was coming from the box. He slid slowly off his mat and crouched beside the bed. The scratching continued. Something inside the box was moving. For a long moment, fear rooted him in place. Then the scratching stopped. The room became completely still. Tunde held his breath. And then, a whisper drifted up from beneath the bed. Soft, cold, and unmistakably clear. Tunde. His entire body froze. The whisper came again. But this time, it carried a faint sound of laughter. A slow, hollow, chilling laugh. Tunde's heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst. Because in that moment he realized something terrible. Whatever had been trapped beneath the hut was no longer trapped anymore. And somehow, it had followed him home. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If you discovered that something supernatural had followed you home, would you try to confront it? Or would you run to the elders for help? Tell me what you would do in the comments. Because Tunde's next decision would determine whether the entire village of Aramu would survive what had just been unleashed. Tunde did not sleep again that night. He sat awake until the first light of dawn crept through the window, his eyes fixed on the floor beside his bed. The wooden box remained exactly where he had placed it, silent, still, but the memory of the whisper kept echoing in his mind. Tunde, he knew one thing for certain now. The elders had been telling the truth. The abandoned hut had never been empty, and whatever had been trapped there was no longer contained. As the village slowly woke with the sounds of roosters crowing and women preparing the morning fires, Tunde made a decision. He could not keep this secret any longer. There was only one person in Aramu who might understand what had happened. Baba Adeyemi, the oldest elder in the village. If anyone knew the truth behind the hut, it would be him. Tunde quickly wrapped the wooden box and the strange book in a cloth and left the house before his mother could ask questions. The morning air was cool, and thin mist hung low over the village farms. His heart pounded as he hurried toward the large irako tree in the center of the village square. Baba Adeyemi was already there, seated on a wooden stool as he often was in the early mornings, watching the village come alive. His long white beard rested against his chest, and his wise eyes seemed to notice everything. When Tunde approached, the old man looked up slowly. For a moment he said nothing. Then his gaze shifted to the bundle in Tunde's hands. His expression changed instantly. "Where did you get that?" Baba Adeyemi asked quietly. Tunde swallowed. I went to the hut last night," he admitted. The elder's eyes widened with alarm. You entered the hut? Tunde nodded slowly. I found these beneath the floor. He carefully unwrapped the cloth and revealed the wooden box and the ancient book. The moment Baba Adeyemi saw them, a deep look of fear crossed his face. For a long time, the elder remained silent. Then he closed his eyes and sighed heavily. I feared this day would come, he murmured. Tunde's voice trembled. What is inside the box, Baba? The old man looked directly at him. What is inside the box is not meant for young ears, he said. But since you have already disturbed it, you must know the truth. Baba Adeyemi leaned forward slowly. Many generations ago, he began, our village faced a terrible darkness. The forest was haunted by a wandering spirit, a restless force that brought sickness, madness, and death to anyone who crossed its path. The people were terrified. No hunter could enter the forest. Crops failed. Children became ill. Tunde listened in stunned silence. But then, the elder continued, a powerful herbalist named Baba Oladipo arrived in Aramu. He was not just a healer. He understood ancient forces that few men dared to study. The villagers begged him for help, and after many days of preparation, he performed a ritual. Baba Adeyemi gestured toward the wooden box. He used sacred herbs, protective symbols, and powerful incantations to trap the wandering spirit. But the spirit could not be destroyed. So Baba Oladipo bound it to a vessel and sealed it beneath the hut. Tunde felt a chill run down his spine. The box, he whispered. Baba Adeyemi nodded slowly. Yes, as long as the box remained sealed, the spirit remained trapped in a deep sleep. The elder's eyes darkened. But the ritual had one weakness. Tunde's heart pounded. What weakness? Baba Adeyemi looked at him gravely. The spirit could awaken if someone opened the vessel, or removed it from the sacred ground where it was buried. Tunde's face turned pale. I took it out of the hut. For a moment, the old man said nothing. Then he nodded sadly. I know. Tunde stared at him in shock. You know? Baba Adeyemi looked toward the forest. The forest has been restless since dawn, he said quietly. Birds refuse to fly near the trees. Dogs have been howling since the night. The elder looked back at Tunde. That spirit has awakened. Fear tightened around Tunde's chest. What do we do? He asked desperately. The elder slowly stood up. His voice was calm, but heavy with urgency. We must return the vessel to the place where it was bound. Before nightfall. Tunde blinked. Why before nightfall? The elder's expression grew darker. Because if the spirit fully awakens after sunset. He paused. It will no longer remain inside the box. A cold silence filled the space between them. And for the first time since discovering the hut, Tunde realized the terrifying truth. The fate of the entire village of Aramu now rested on whether he could help return the box before darkness fell. Before we continue, think about this. If you were Tunde, would you have the courage to return to the haunted hut after everything that happened? Or would the fear stop you? Let me know in the comments, because what happens next will decide whether the secret behind the abandoned hut is sealed forever, or unleashed upon the village. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the village of Aramu, Tunde felt the weight of the wooden box pressing against his chest. Every step toward the abandoned hut was heavy with fear, yet he knew he could not turn back. The elder's warnings rang loudly in his mind. The spirit must be returned before nightfall, or the village would pay the price. The forest seemed to lean closer, its trees whispering secrets only Tunde could feel. The air was thick, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient herbs. Each crack in the hut's walls looked like an eye watching him, and the wind carried soft murmurs that made his skin crawl. Yet, beneath the fear, a determination burned inside him, a quiet courage that had grown stronger with every step. He reached the hut just as the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky. Hands trembling, Tunde placed the box carefully in its hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. The moment it settled, the room grew still. The whispers ceased. The cold air lifted. It was as if the forest itself exhaled in relief. Tunde closed the lid with reverence and sealed it once more, whispering a silent prayer for forgiveness. At that moment, Baba Adeyemi appeared at the hut's entrance. The elder's wise eyes met Tunde's, and a gentle nod confirmed what Tunde already felt. The village was safe once again. The power of respect, courage, and understanding had restored balance. When Tunde returned home, the stars above Aramu seemed brighter, and the distant hoot of an owl sounded like a blessing. He knew he had not only faced his fear but had also honored the wisdom of those who came before him. From that night onward, he carried a quiet understanding of the delicate balance between curiosity and caution, bravery and respect. The story of the abandoned hut became part of his own life's lesson. He shared it carefully with younger children in the village, teaching them that knowledge and bravery must always be paired with wisdom, and that some mysteries, no matter how tempting, are protected for a reason. And so, the moral was clear. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely in the face of it. Respect the lessons of the past, honor the unseen forces around us, and understand that even the smallest act of bravery can preserve life and harmony. If you enjoyed this tale and the journey of Tunde, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more mesmerizing African folktales. Remember, some secrets are timeless, and some stories are meant to be passed down, just like this one.